So Niall, you wrote this article just now on Nigeria. It seems outrageous. Like the IMF is causing them to pay market prices or American prices for petrol.
Yes, basically what's happened. The new IMF chief managing director, Christine Lagarde, she's recently done a trip to West Africa, where she visited the government of Nigeria, and she basically ordered the countries in the region, such as Chad, Ghana, Nigeria, and I believe Guinea, to basically remove these much-needed fuel subsidies. And, a lot of these countries, they don't really have paved roads in most of the areas, so fuel and kind of vehicles powered by fuel are totally a part of life for the people there. So essentially what's happened, these countries have simultaneously pulled these fuel subsidies, and, kind of unsurprisingly, the populations there have taken to the streets, in total anger.
So there's been riots and demonstrations.
Yes, all throughout Nigeria, focused in Abuja, which is the capital, and Lagos, which is the biggest city in the country, the main economic capital.
They had a civil war with Biafra, didn't they, many years ago? Are you familiar with that?
I'm not too familiar on that. However, what I do think is worth bringing up is that there's a Islamist separatist group in Nigeria, operating out of Nigeria now, called Boko Haram, which roughly translates to, we don't support Western education. That's essentially what it translates into. And basically this group, much like the situation in Sudan, this group aims to separate northern Muslim-dominated Nigeria with the southern Christian Nigeria. So basically you're having, especially recently, I'm surprised that they brought out this fuel subsidy drop, because recently, especially on Christmas, there was a Christmas Day bombing in Nigeria where something like 40 or 50 people were killed, and just last night I read some news where something similar happened in the northern part of the country. So there's certainly a lot of tension there internally, and the prospect of a civil war is ever present.
Fuel subsidies throws me a little bit, because it's a producer of fuel. It wouldn't really need to subsidize the prices. Isn't that a semantical... Go on.
Yeah, this is where it gets pretty complicated, because in Nigeria, it's probably well known for having one of the most corrupt, domestic ruling elites, ever, basically. You have people in the government there. First, you have a woman called Okonjo Iweala, who was the vice president of the World Bank. She's essentially the de facto prime minister of Nigeria at the moment. And in the government itself, you have ex-Goldman Sachs employees. I mean, you have agents of high finance, basically, in the government there. So what's happened, Nigeria does not have any oil refineries, but it produces something like 2 million barrels a day for export use, and something like 500,000 for domestic use, which it then exports and has to bring back into the country. So there's no working refineries there. And what pisses the people off so much is that the government has said, we're going to cut this fuel subsidy. It's going to save us something like $8 billion a year. We're then going to put that into infrastructure. And then the people are saying, well, wait, we've been, producing oil and exporting it for over 20 years, and our infrastructure is crumbling, and the population doesn't have access to clean water in most places, and we're struggling to create electricity. So another point worth mentioning about Nigeria is something like 90% of the bank deposits in Nigeria are owned by 6% of the depositors. So you have a country where the gap between the rich and the poor, the haves and the have-nots, are just immense.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if it were true in England or America, the last statistics you mentioned. I've heard of terrible pollution problems in Nigeria, as if it's a war zone. Are you familiar with that? Where the oil is being produced, it's devastating the whole environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And that whole region of Africa, especially, is one of the last sort of uncharted wildernesses. I mean, it's more Central Africa, it's more Congo, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, that's just there in the middle, that has a lot of the incredible wilderness and incredible endangered species. But certainly Nigeria as well has. I mean, this is a country that's not really looking after its environmental issues very much at all. I mean,
I think
something
it's
like 80%. Oh yeah, yeah.
causing.
Certainly, the extraction and the like are contributing to it quite a bit. I didn't include it in the article. However, I did read that China was contributing something like 80% of the funds for Nigeria's first reactor. Refinery, not reactor, refinery. Its first oil refinery, and the Nigerian government would then put up 20% in an effort to sort of essentially make things a bit cheaper for the Nigerians, and it's obviously a means for China to gain more of a foothold in that region. But yeah.
Well, the pattern as of late has been kicking China out of everywhere. One almost wonders when that will happen in Nigeria. The pollution was so great. I think it's causing a lot of illness and no doubt resentment. Fueling prospects for a civil war, etc.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Especially the people in the South tend to be more focused on the economics. People in the northern side of the country tend to be more traditionally Islamic and not really too active on the economic front. So I can certainly see why they would be quite resentful. But there's certainly the seeds are there, for it to sprout into a serious kind of civil war. And we see that happening where we're having bombings in Nigeria almost every day. So another thing that my article goes into is the fact that in 2008, the United States military under AFRICOM conducted these war game scenarios in the United States. The scenario basically featured Nigeria, disintegrating Nigeria, set a couple years. I think it's set in 2013, ironically enough, and the rebel factions were vying for control of the Niger Delta, which is where most of America's oil comes from. So this is something that our military is already kind of considering, and is already it's already been sort of in books.
I think there are big designs on West Africa, and Libya was no doubt part of those designs, and maybe will prove to be a foothold for an American base and French base to pursue these goals. Doesn't most of Nigerian oil exports don't they go to the USA? Is that correct?
A large amount of Nigerian oil does go to America. Some of it goes to China as well. But I think now more and more, I believe the new Nigerian president, Goodluck Jonathan, came into to office, I believe, a year or two ago. But I do recall reading that some of the former administrations were thoroughly against the idea of an AFRICOM base in Nigeria, and but now things are more and more are sort of fomenting over into sort of chaos. But I do believe that the current administration in Nigeria, at least elements of it, who were previously employees of Goldman Sachs and whatnot, they're obviously compliant to what the Nigerians call the colonial overseers of the country. So in the minds of the educated Nigerians who are looking at this, I mean, I don't think I think they're aware that not much has changed in terms of the governance of the country and the larger economic picture of things. I think they're totally they're aware.
Do you reckon Nigeria's going to be like the local lord and superpower for West Africa?
I mean, it certainly has a potential. I've read, Nigeria is the most populous African nation, and it has a booming telecommunications business at the moment because just the demand is there for it. And, it's pretty ironic. More people in Africa have a cell phone than they do access to hygienic kind of waste disposal facilities. So I mean, it's certainly an interesting paradigm going on there. But I think the idea of a stable Nigeria, in charge of its own refineries, working to pay off its debt, and sort of if the people were really in control of their economy, so to speak, it does certainly have the potential to be a superpower. But I think the internal... Yeah, go on.
I meant like a stooge, a superpower stooge, like Ethiopia is in East Africa. It sends its troops abroad and has built up a big military. And I could just imagine Nigeria would be the local policeman for American interests with its neighboring countries.
Personally, I think that there's too much domestic insecurity in Nigeria for that really to go on now, especially considering that they have... the most proven oil reserves in Africa after Libya. So I think there's certainly more in it I just think this war game scenario that took place in 2006. It's so clear what the thing is. If there's a situation in Nigeria where things look unstable and there's a pretext for military intervention, there's certainly a lot there to harvest, and it's a strategic area, and certainly carving up the country as we saw, and saw over in Sudan. I think there's a serious potential for that to actually occur in the next few years. So I certainly think at least northern Nigeria will be portrayed as a hub for the war on terror. I think that's where things are going to go personally in the next few years. Keep your eyes on Nigeria.
Yeah.